All right. It is officially 9 a.m. here in the Netherlands, so we are going to get started. Welcome, everybody. My name is Katie Greeley. I use she, her pronouns. I am the founder of Prevention Ed, and I am going to ask my colleague Kevin to unmute and introduce himself.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for attending today. My name is Kevin Fair. I'm a prevention specialist here with Prevention Ed, and I currently reside in Muscat, Oman.
Amazing. Well, Kevin and I are so excited to be discussing this topic with you all today. Today, we are focusing on what we are calling at Prevention Ed the GAPS, which stands for gambling, gaming, alcohol, and other drugs, which is our bread and butter, porn, and social media. We recently did a session on this at the International School Counselors Association conference for ISCA in Prague, and it was very well received. And we wanted to make this information more available to the larger international school community. So again, thank you so much for taking the time to be here today. We are recording the session. So when it comes to the questions asked part of our time together, I will hit stop recording. But for now, we hope to send this out to you all who signed up if you are not present here today. And if you are, but really enjoyed what you learned, please feel free to share this recording widely with those who you think would benefit. So a little bit about Prevention Ed. Prevention Ed, we are a global substance use prevention organization. We work with students all over the world. And what makes us unique is that individuals that work for Prevention Ed, we are all in long-term healthy recovery from alcohol and other drug addiction. When we work with students, counselors, parents, staff, we use our story as a tool, right? Our work with the students in schools is not based on our story. It is a tool that we use to deliver, research-backed curriculum on the teenage brain, on social norms, and really when it comes to alcohol and other drug and gambling prevention, providing young people with the most up-to-date relevant facts to these topics. Young people don't react well to don't do drugs are bad, just say no, that didn't work. Instead, the most effective prevention strategy is providing young people with up-to-date factual information about all the risk associated with cannabis, with alcohol, with gambling, and so on. And when we do that, they are more likely to make a healthier, informed choice. And when we do that in the classroom with them, Kevin can speak to this as well, it's a breath of fresh air. They really appreciate that approach, and we make them equal partners in the conversation, and they're leaving our sessions with at least one piece of information that could help them make a healthier choice. And that is our goal when we step onto campuses and schools for Prevention Ed. So I always like to start my sessions with defining the very thing that we are here to prevent. One of the things that we are here to prevent, and that is addiction. And so we use the World Health Organization's definition of addiction, which is an individual's repetitive, compulsive use of a substance or behavior despite negative consequences. And those last three words, very important to this definition. You'll notice behavior is in this sentence as well. And so when we talk about the GAPS, gambling, gaming, alcohol, or other drugs, pornography, and social media, right? Three of those are behaviors. And so everything that we touch on when it comes to addiction is from the health perspective, right? I guess that's the main perspective that we come from, I should say, rather. And so when Prevention Ed decided to start talking about one of the most requested topics from our students over the past 2 years, it's because we felt that not only, I'm bearing the lead here a little bit, did we realize that a gambling disorder puts a young person at a higher risk for developing a substance use disorder, but it wasn't that different. And I'll say a little bit more about that in a second. And so the through line through all of these behaviors, all of the GAPS, is how it impacts the brain. And that's what we're going to talk about. And we know, right, that young people are especially vulnerable when it comes to their brains. So one of my inspirations for the sessions, if you haven't already read the book, by Dr. Anna Lemke is called Dopamine Nation. A wonderful book. They also have a wonderful workbook for the counselors that are joining our session today. And I thought this quote was relevant, right? Dopamine is the universal currency for measuring the addictive potential for any experience. And so all of these things that we're going to discuss today, this is a major part of why we're discussing them. And we know that young people's brains are more dopamine rich, right? And their prefrontal cortex is less fully developed, which puts them, like I said, at even a higher risk for some of these behaviors and developing unhealthy habits with them. All right. So I'm about to take you all back to your Psych 101 class or your, student's current AP Psych class. And we're going to talk about two scientists, two pretty well-known experiments. The more well-known one would be Pavlov, right? And I love this slide because I get to show you all a photo of my dog, Piggy. So we know that Pavlov, right? Pavlovian, you've probably heard it also said that I'm having a Pavlovian experience, right? What Pavlov did was he conditioned his dog, right? When he would ring a bell, he would pair that with giving the dog a treat. And for whatever reason, my dog likes the treats that is good for her teeth, greenies, right? And so every time Pavlov gave this dog rang the bell, he gave the dog a treat. It got conditioned, and he did this hundreds and hundreds of times. And pretty quickly, the dog realized bell equals treat, right? And when Pavlov would hit the bell, the dog would start drooling. This actually happens in my house with my dog. Okay, so this is what we call a predictable reward. Think of this as alcohol and other drugs. When I drink, I know I'm going to get drunk, right? I have that craving. I put that substance into my body. I get that hit that I need, that intoxication. I can anticipate that. That is predictable. And then there's something in a lesser known experiment called by Skinner, right? The reward is called a variable reward. And this is the Skinner pigeon experiment, right? Where Skinner put a bunch of pigeons into a box, and the reward was not guaranteed every time. So the experiment looked like the pigeons would be in a box, there would be a lever, and sometimes when the pigeons pressed that lever, a little pellet would come out, and that was their reward. Well, again, the pellets did not come out every single time the lever was pressed. And so, the pigeons started to maybe get a little superstitious, actually. It's actually quite an interesting experiment when you read more into it. And they found out when they turned around once, right, and pressed the lever, a pellet would come out. Or if they, danced a little bit, tapped their feet, 2 feet over here, or their left foot twice and their right foot once, and then pressed the lever, a pellet would come out. And so the pigeons started to get superstitious. And really, what they were experiencing, the reward that they were experiencing, was the anticipation of that pellet. It wasn't guaranteed every time. And we can compare this to placing a bet and winning. Here's the difference between what we see with alcohol or the drugs with the predictable reward and what we see with the variable reward when it comes to behaviors like gambling, social media, which we'll talk a little bit more about, pornography, and gaming. So both of these experiences activate that reward center in the brain, but it looks slightly different. And we're going to talk about why that is important in a second. So what I would like you all to do is, if you can, I want you all to think about what you would guess, and you can scan this QR code with your phone if you're able to. What do you think for Prevention Ed in the classroom with in all of our schools was the most asked about topic this school year? So go ahead. You should be able to scan that QR code and vote on what you believe was the most requested about or asked about topic this year. Okay. By the way, this is Slido. I love this resource. I use it with my students all the time. You'll see in a second, I use it for them to vote for what they would like to talk about while we're in the classroom with them. We're really there to bring information to the students about what's most relevant to them. We get a short period of time with them every week when we're on a school campus. And so this is a really valuable tool. Of course, we're covering certain topics while we talk with them, but I like to think of our experience, at least at the high school level with our students, as a choose your own adventure. We're going to talk about all of these things, but it gives us a sense and it gives us some data actually about what is most relevant to them in their community. Okay, so 34 individuals for the sake of time. We'll pause here. If anyone has their last minute votes, please get it in. But let's see, we have social media at the top, then gambling, then nicotine, then pornography, then alcohol. All right, so here's what the students requested. And again, this is just a couple of our screenshots from our Slido data with our students. But across the board, pretty much every single class that we have, the most requested topic is gambling, sports betting. Then typically alcohol, then typically nicotine or snus, right? We have one outlier here, which fentanyl was the third, number 3. But the most requested and asked about topics in the classroom this year have been number 1, gambling, alcohol, and nicotine, right? And so because of that, I would say in the fall, when I would bring up gambling and that this is something that we're talking about with students, our contacts would be a little bit intrigued and surprised. By now, most of you probably are not. This is something now that is on people's radar because it is discussed and becoming an issue everywhere where we work, in the United States, in Europe, in Asia, and anywhere you can, Central and South America, that Prevention Ed is working. So a good chunk of our session today is going to be focusing on this, gambling and gaming, the G of the gaps, right? And so similarly, the World Health Organization also has a definition for gambling. And so the World Health Organization defines gambling as risking money or any item of monetary value on an event of an uncertain outcome with the possibility of gaining an increased return, right? And so another item of value, we'll talk about what that means and why that's also significant to young kids. So if we were doing this session last year at this time, already this slide would have looked very different, right? Last year, we were saying sports betting. We got to be talking about sports betting with your students. It is gambling, right? That's what sports betting is. There's been gambling with sports as long as sports have existed. But already in 1 year, the landscape has significantly changed. And so these are all the things under this umbrella we would like to discuss and put on your radar. So yes, obviously sports betting. The top, the phone on the right-hand side of the screen, that's a very popular sports betting app in the United States called DraftKings Sportsbook. Ones that are more relevant to Europe and Asia would be Bet365 or Stake. I'll show you some of their marketing materials in a moment. In-game betting, what is that? A lot of our students and adults are surprised when they see Roblox up on the screen right now. If you have a child who plays Roblox and you've gotten them what's called Robux, you've bought $5 worth of Robux so they can play and build and create in their game. You've probably also gotten 100 notifications to buy more Robux on your phone or devices that you're using those platforms on. There's something called the Robux Casino, which again, I'll talk about in-game betting and what that is, also known as gotcha games. Investment clubs. This is the sneaky one. We just actually put out a blog on this. Essentially, right, what this looks like. And after we present to parents, I'll always have a parent come up to me and say, like all of a sudden my child got really into the stock market, really into investing. We were so excited. We, gave them their own account. And I think now I kind of might know what's happening, right? So when I'm talking about investing, the image that you see on the screen is from an app called Robinhood. Again, that's a US based app, but there's many iterations of this and it looks very similar. Gamified financial platforms, right? I invest money to buy stocks. When I press that button to deposit, a lightning bolt hits my phone. It vibrates. When I sell a stock, I swipe up and cash explodes. Again, it vibrates. Um, and it's not so much that I want us to keep an eye out for these investing clubs for young people um, investing in the S&P 500 year over year, hoping to gain that 7% interest compounding, right? We actually know responsible investing is super boring. It doesn't release a lot of dopamine in their brains, in a 16-year-old boy's brain. Instead, right, what we're typically seeing is this idea that I'm going to be the next wolf on Wall Street, a little bit of what we are calling financial nihilism. Um, School is a waste of money, maybe. And the best way for me to get rich would be, through trading cryptocurrency or trading calls, puts, so stock options, which are incredibly volatile, incredibly high risk um, investing, right? So putting this on people's radar, I'll have a link into the blog on a little bit more. We go into this a little bit more detail, but something that if this is on campus, there should be faculty oversight. There should be considered maybe an audit of the behavior in these spaces, and parents should be brought in as well. Prediction markets, this is the new one that we're hearing about. We have here been hearing about now, right? You can bet on how many inches it's going to snow in your city. You can bet on, is this leader of this country going to say these three words during his speech? You can bet on everything and anything under the sun. And Polymarket's one of them. Kalshi's another one. You don't have to register your age to get an account. You can sign up using cryptocurrency. And so just something else to have on your platform or on your radar. Crypto casinos, again, another traditional like casino, but online, roulette, poker, blackjack. Cryptocurrency trading, we can put this in under the investing. Cryptocurrency is incredibly volatile. It's speculation. It is gambling. And then good old fashioned peer-to-peer betting is coming back into style. Um, there have been some instances with schools that we've been working with where there is a student bookie, right? Whether it's collecting cash or that student is the legal age to be using these platforms and is collecting money to place bets on his phone as the bookie for other students. As you can imagine, this can create some safety concerns and some other dynamics that are not healthy for the community. But it's not just all online anymore. In-person betting has come back a little bit into style as well. Okay, so one of the most concerning areas of this, and it makes me think of vaping, makes me think of big tobacco, is the predatory nature of these companies and their strategy, which has always been their strategy, which is get them started while they're young. So I had Roblox up on the screen. I mentioned in-game betting. What is in-game betting? It is betting money or tokens of financial value that you can purchase using money, right, within games. So what can this look like? This could look like someone playing, I forget exactly what the game's called, but it's a Western style game and it's a first person shooter game and they can, go around the town, shooting people or, right, and completing their mission or sit down at the poker table and play a game of poker within the game using real tokens that have monetary value. It could be FIFA, right, where your currency is the time that you play, right? So if you play hours and hours and hours, you rack up these points, and then you can buy a FIFA pack, or you can just buy the coins to buy the FIFA pack. And the FIFA pack might have a player in it, a certain player, Ronaldo, Messi, Mbappe. Again, I don't know a ton about football. That's more Kevin's area, but it's something that we know our international school kids, like that is the sport, right? They get a player who's really well known. That player has a really high value attached to them. They can either trade and sell that platform on secondary platforms called Steam, or uh, it's a collection, right? It's what is happening in these moments, right? With the player packs, with the Roblox casino, where it literally is you take those Robux, you put them into a slot machine in the game, or this loot box, which I'll explain to a second. It is the young person, very young person sometimes, going through this anticipation reward experience in their developing brain, right? So they are anticipating that they're going to get Ronaldo, right? They're anticipating that they're going to get, the three cherries in the Roblox casino, or in this loot box, right? Which is another game called Counter-Strike, which you can buy for €2, right? You could purchase this unknown loot box for €2. It shakes, it opens up after you purchase it, and in comes out a potential skin, which is like an avatar, like a costume for their character, worth $400, right? So there's these microtransactions on these platforms that mimic gambling, and through loopholes, right, have not been considered gambling. There was a recent case against FIFA that went to the Australian Supreme Court, and they said, no, this is not gambling. But what we do know is that it acts on the brain the very same way that an actual slot machine would work, right? And so thinking about the younger kiddos that are using these games, it's priming them, right, for that experience. A fifth grader who plays Roblox, right? When he becomes a ninth grader whose couple friends have started betting during the Champion League, which is happening right now, that young person who struggles with managing his time with Roblox, right? Introduced to actual sports betting, you can see how this can progress pretty quickly, right? So the priming of this experience is happening at young ages. It is a loophole, and it's something that's not on a lot of people's radar. But I guarantee you, if you mention gotcha games to your fifth and sixth graders, a good percentage of them will actually know what you're talking about. All right. So another thing, right? There's a little bit of a history about how we got to here. I'm going to go through it very quickly. Essentially, right, 2018 in the United States, the Supreme Court overturned the ban on sports betting. And since that moment, right, what we saw was an explosion of sports betting platforms, apps, websites, and really what this has resulted in is not only these companies making billions and billions and billions of dollars, but a historic period of unregulated advertising. We know now you walk through an airport, the duty section, the duty free section, and especially in Europe where I am, and smoking kills, right? It's right there. That Surgeon General warning in the United States, those images of those black tarred lungs, right? That was a result of regulation. Right. We know now we've stopped selling flavored vapes in some places, many places where you all are, including myself. They are banned, but they are still being sold, right? We're catching up with the new technology, the new products, and we're in the process of regulating them. We have not gotten there with sports betting, and I feel like we are quite a little bit of time out, right? So all over the world now, we have these apps, we have these platforms. They're really trying to take advantage of this moment in time where there is no regulation on their advertising. And so their advertising is targeted, it's manipulative, and to a 16-year-old teenage boy, betting £1 and getting £40 in free bonus bets sounds like a great deal, right? What those young people don't understand is that is like a drug dealer saying your first time's free, right? And so what these platforms will do, £40 is actually kind of on the lower end of what I've seen in the US. I've seen, bet $5, get $200 in free bonus bets. What that looks like is bonus bets is not like I can deposit $5 and withdraw $200 cash. That's not how this works, right? It's that open up my wallet. I go through the process. I agree, to the terms and conditions. I deposit my $5, and then those $200 in bonus bets, I need to bet $10 increments 20 different times. So going back to that definition of addiction, that repetitive compulsive use of a substance or behavior despite negative consequences, right? That's what they're doing. They're trying to get that person into their platform, experiencing that anticipation hit of dopamine and that reward. They see it as zero risk to them. And let me say something on that, right? It's perceived zero risk. So I've been working in schools now as a prevention specialist for about a decade. Before that, I'm a certified addictions counselor, a licensed clinical social worker. I worked in a treatment facility in the United States. When we work in the classroom, and any of my team members can say this, one of the many I would say rewarding things is that we get to help some kids, right? We're helping, I believe, all of the kids, giving them information that they need to make a healthy choice. But we're also there for those kids that aren't bad kids, but have started to make some unhealthy choices, right? And sometimes, they will trust us enough where they'll say, "Hey, I'm worried about my use." That is more rare, but when it does happen, we can get that kid help. We can connect them with the counselor before we leave that campus, and we know we did something. Our week was a success, even if we helped that one kid. More often than not, right? It's, "Hey, can I talk to you? I'm worried about my friend," right? And sometimes the friend's real, right? And sometimes the friend's not real, right? They're talking about themselves, their own use. But what that is saying to us, right, is I know that the school has rules about alcohol or the drugs. I know that there's laws about this. I know that my parents could be upset with me or worried about me if they found out I was using alcohol or the drugs. I've been told since I was a kid not to do it. They get that there's risk attached to that behavior. One of the reasons why we have been we thought it was an ethical responsibility for Prevention Ed to start talking about gambling is because our students do not perceive it as risky. They're what we call, when we look at the stages of change in motivational interviewing, in the pre-contemplation stage of change for my counselors on the call right now. They were so forthcoming about their behaviors, about how much they were betting, about how much they lost, right? About their friend who was betting, that they did not see the risk involved. And when I say risk, a lot of people, the first risk that comes to mind is financial risk. And for our students in international schools, and for any of our students actually, regardless of their socioeconomic status, that is the least of our concerns. When it comes to this behavior, the anxiety and depression levels associated with problem gambling are through the roof. Individuals that are struggling with problem gambling are 5 times their non-gambling disorder peers to experience suicidality, right? The experience of cross addiction, right, increases their risk of cross addiction. That was another reason why Prevention Ed said this is something that we need to take on. There are so many health issues, mental health issues, safety issues attached to this behavior that goes beyond losing money that I think are what we should be focusing on when it comes to our number one concern, which is the health and wellness of our students. So we're in this historic age, right, where risk-free bets. Two of the major sporting events that should be on your radar right now are the NBA playoffs. The international school community or international students, they actually always ask me about basketball, and I don't know anything about the NBA, but we know that's actually a very popular sport everywhere in the world, as well as football, the Champion League tournament, which is happening, I believe, through May 30th. Another thing just to think about, not just the platforms themselves advertising, but who are they leveraging, right? The classic, celebrity endorsement. So on what you see LeBron James there, what a lot of students call the GOAT, right? I know that's up for debate. Again, I'm not a huge NBA fan, but I do know enough to know LeBron James, and I do know enough that I think LeBron James is not sitting on his couch Sunday afternoon placing a parlay watching American football, right? So parlays are the number one most popular way to bet on these platforms. What that actually looks like is stringing multiple bets together, and it's an all or nothing thing. So it's not just that the Kansas City Chiefs will win over the Los Angeles. I think that's I don't know who that is. Anyways, it's not that just the Kansas City Chiefs will win. It's also that I could add that this player will score a touchdown and this quarterback will throw a pass this many yards. And if all of those things happen, I win big. The more parlay bets I add to my parlay, the bigger the reward. So the more risk, the more reward, right? Yeah, so LeBron didn't make his money off of this bet. You can bet like LeBron, right? That's the whole idea. This is not about luck. LeBron James is the GOAT. He knows sports. And so this is about skill. And if you're a really good sports fan and you actually like know your sport and know your team, you're not going to lose. You just got to pick the right things, right? And what we love about sports is it's all about chance, right? That's what makes sports so exciting. So this idea that like this is a skill-based bet, not just gambling. Um, by the way, I always tell my students like, hey, if you Google the other GOAT and gambling, aka Michael Jordan, you're gonna read about his gambling, his struggles with gambling and gambling disorder, right? The individual on the right, that is an influencer from the area of the internet you all may know as the Manosphere. His name is Togi. Togi is kind of like, there was Andrew Tate. Togi's a little bit like, he's a little old at this point in terms of like, he's not the most, trendy blogger at the moment, but he's still relevant to students. They see him when they see this image, they do laugh, and they laugh because Togi is known to be outrageous, right? That's his whole brand. And an example of what that could look like, and has what he did do, and I don't know if he's still doing it or not, but he would be hired by an online casino. He would live stream his bet, $10,000, red or black. They would spin the virtual roulette wheel and win big, lose big. It doesn't matter to Togi because he's now got 30,000 live viewers. That $10,000 was given to him by that platform. There's no financial cost to him. And actually, he's making money no matter what because his affiliate link, right, that he is now advertising while during the live stream to this casino is what's making him the money, right? So one thing that we talk a lot about with our students is the how they're being manipulated, right? With the advertisements I just showed you on the last screen, and influencers and all of that, right? So really, this goes into that manosphere influence, and you all will receive a PDF copy of this presentation today. This image will be hyperlinked as well. This image is taken from a recent New York Times article about the manosphere and the financial exploitation that is happening to a lot of young men and boys, really. So some of the people on the screen, I don't know any of them besides Drake, right, who you can see towards the center right. But they are big on marketing for these sports betting platforms, these prediction markets, cryptocurrency platforms, online casinos. A Guardian article that came out this past October that talked about Andrew Tate and the Manosphere. Of course, there's the misogyny. Of course, there's the racism. Of course, there's many terrible things that come from that space. And also, 80% of what Andrew Tate talked about was getting rich. 80%. And you can get rich by paying $50 a month to join his Andrew Tate University on how to invest, right? So there's that connection to investing and getting rich quick that we're seeing a lot of young people think is their only way to success and wealth. So I'm starting to wrap up the gambling part before I hand it over to Kevin. I got two more slides, I believe, but it's not just about gambling, right? So there's several things that are happening here. We have the behavior, right? That hit of dopamine, that anticipation. I'm placing the bet. Is my team going to win? And watching the game, and then the win, right? So you have that behavioral science aspect of it that is addictive. You have the user experience, aka the design of these platforms that are engineered to release the most dopamine in your brain, the gamified aspect of it. And then you have these platforms themselves, which, I like to think of it as Silicon Valley had a baby with Las Vegas, right? They have all of this data, all of the statistics on these sports. They're constantly changing the odds using AI. And there's no way, no matter how skilled you are, how much you know sports, or you think you know about what's going to happen in politics and, on this prediction market platform, that you're going to win. This is the house always wins, powered by AI. And so one of the other scary things that, again, is a really powerful teaching moment with our students is they have all of this in their pocket, right? It's hard to compete with them. And also, they're using your data against you. And this is the thing that every time I learn a little bit more about this, it scares me a little bit more. And it makes me think that sometimes they're even worse than big tobacco and these vaping companies, right? And so, what does that look like? So I'm from originally Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. So I'll reference the one sport I do know slightly well, and that would be American football, and that would be the Philadelphia Eagles. Go Birds! So I don't gamble because I'm in recovery. I know that that would be a very slippery slope for me. I am more vulnerable to develop a gambling disorder. But if I was to bet, right, and then I pick up my phone, and every Sunday I bet on the Philadelphia Eagles. And a month goes by into the beginning of the football season, the American football season. I'm like, I've lost over $100. Maybe I'm gonna chill out. I'm gonna put my phone down. I'm not interested. This is not looking good for me. I'm just gonna enjoy the game. Well, first off, now watching sports has been paired with this dopamine experience of betting, and it's not going to be as nice of experience as it was before, right? So that's something to consider that I talk about with people a lot that love sports. But also, that app, that platform knows the Eagles are my favorite team. They know, an hour before the game, I'm putting my bets in. And they know when I've tried to do this before last season, right? They offered me $10 in free bonus bets, a push notification 10 minutes before the game, and I was right back in, right? So they're collecting data on users. They know our betting patterns. They know people that make 1,000 deposits or 3,000 deposits in a year. They can identify problem gamblers, right? That would be like when I quit smoking, which I always tell my students, nicotine was the hardest drug for me to quit. Parliament was sending free cartons of cigarettes to my door, right? They didn't have that direct line to me. When I went to treatment, I was told to avoid people, places, and things when I got sober. These behaviors and these devices and these platforms, right? They've removed all time and space. They will live in our pockets. I did not have my drug of choice in my pocket after I got out of treatment. And so this is something that a lot of young people, like I said, they don't see the risk yet. They don't see it as risky at all. And I don't blame them. They've been bombarded with advertisements. Billions of dollars have been poured into this industry, but they don't realize that they might be setting themselves up for a lifelong struggle with gambling and other addictions, right? So we want this on your radar. We want this on parents' radar. We're going to talk a little bit along in the training about how we can get that on those individuals' radar. But I believe now, right? Oh, one more thing. Sorry. And this is what I was saying. It doesn't take much for them to get to an area where this is considered a disorder, right? So for alcohol or the drugs, cannabis use disorder, alcohol use disorder, when I worked in treatment, that was part of my role of assessing individuals and recommending that diagnosis for them for treatment. For a gambling disorder, it only takes 4 of these to meet that criteria and be diagnosed with a gambling disorder, which is a worldwide recognized mental illness. Okay, so tolerance, that could be, I bet $2, the next time I bet $4, the next bet I bet $6. That also can be risk tolerance. I'm going to do a parlay with 6 different hits instead of 3, right? Withdrawal, what this looks like, and we've been seeing it and been hearing about it on school campuses, is all of a sudden, not so much with sports betting, but maybe with day trading and investing. My kids, I have a student who's not really engaged. I can tell he's distracted and he's taking his phone and he's going and sitting in the bathroom stall so he can day trade. That is not an uncommon experience. I've heard that many versions of that over the past year. Loss of control, right? We know what that looks like. Inability, 1,000 deposits in, a year or 3,000 deposits in a year. That's not uncommon. One thing that is unique to this specific behavior would be something called chasing losses. So the idea that I lost $100, I lost 100 euros, I'm going to bet 50 euros to win that 100 euro back. And as you can imagine, that becomes a very vicious cycle pretty quickly when you are placing bets reactively in a panic to win money back, right? Think about what gambling is. Think about what investing is. It's weighing risk versus reward. The very last thing that develops on the teenage brain is that prefrontal cortex, which one of its responsibilities is weighing risk versus reward. And so this behavior itself is very risky and can progress and get out of hand very quickly. So now I believe I'm going to hand it over to Kevin to share more on our bread and butter, alcohol, and other drugs.
Thank you, Katie. That was wonderful. Fantastic job. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about alcohol, nicotine, and cannabis. And because Katie and I are in two separate locations, she's going to be in charge of clicking the slides. So this will be a little learn through progress as we move along here so we get our timing right. But we're not going to spend a whole lot of time talking necessarily about these different substances. This is going to be a little bit to provide you with some information, maybe some new trends, things that are happening right now in our schools, new substances, new different kinds of alcohol that we're seeing, but also gives you a little glimpse into a little bit about how we talk to students as well. So first and foremost, our message is delayed use. When we go into school, again, it's not just say no, it's not don't do drugs, it's not the DARE program, it's delayed use. But when you get into upper high school or high school in general, but definitely in the upper grades and upper levels of high school, a lot of students have either started using a drug like alcohol, have tried alcohol, or have said no to using alcohol. So they've already made that decision. And that delayed use can sometimes be not as effective with those students that have already tried using or are currently using. And so then if for appropriate for message for those students, is a little bit more along the lines of harm reduction. How can we keep everyone safe? What are some telltale signs of alcohol poisoning, things like that? So we're going to start with alcohol. And here are some of the recent data that we have. And this is from our own survey, the Student Substance Use and Peer Perception Survey, SUP, as it's known. And so these are from the students all over the world. And again, we're now going into this predictable reward system. Drink alcohol, feel the effects. Thinking about partying in the weekend, you're anticipating that on Friday. Students aren't paying attention in school because they know they got a big party that night or on Saturday. And so they're anticipating that feeling, which then releases that dopamine. And this is how similar to then what a craving might be like when we start talking about addiction, is they're craving that feeling that they're going to get the next time that they drink. All right, Katie, go ahead. All right, so here are some new and renewed alcohol trends that we've seen. Depending on where you are in the world, you may or may not have heard of these different substances. Hard seltzers have been around in the States for quite some time. We also now have THC seltzers, so we're having cannabis seltzers that are becoming much more popular as we've seen the amount of, specifically adults, the amount of adults drinking in the US go way down, but we've seen them using other substances as a replacement. But Katie and I were just talking yesterday while we were prepping for this, and in her area near The Hague, when she was going to the grocery store, she was seeing way more hard seltzers than she had the previous spring. It's a well-known summer drink, light, refreshing, crisp. As you can see, we're getting close to, based on the pictures of the seltzers on the left, we're getting as many different flavors almost as we see now with vapes, right? They're using that same kind of marketing trend. White Claws had a big summer a couple summers ago. That was a big trend. Topo Chicos are very popular as well. So we're starting to see these hard seltzers start to evolve with their advertising techniques and their marketing, as well as expand to other locations around the world. The Buzz Balls are basically a pre-made cocktail that you see on the right there. I actually took this ad from a news article out of India. They were promoting that Buzz Balls are now in India. So they're also starting to have a more global market. 15% ABV, so that's about 3 times the amount of alcohol as a standard beer, and about double that of a glass of wine. So quite strong, fun, fruity. They look cool. I mean, objectively, that looks like a cool thing to drink out of. So you can see how it could young people would be tempted to want to drink something like that. All right. All right, so we talk a lot about stages of intoxication, and this will be for all grade levels when we start talking about how alcohol affects the brain. But when we think about a harm reduction strategy too, when we're going through each red Solo cup, which probably brings some feelings and some nostalgia, maybe some embarrassment when you think about your college age. For me, it's a little bit of both when thinking about red Solo cups. But we go through each Solo cup and how it affects the brain. And so this is a way to talk about harm reduction is, okay, if you're looking at the decision-making part of the stages of intoxication, it's the first effect that people start feeling from alcohol use. And so that would be maybe one drink or two, depending on the individual, compared to the very backside of the brain when we talk about vital functions, is when we get to the most dangerous pattern of drinking, the one that puts people at the highest risk for a lot of interference with their health and well-being, as well as leading up to and developing a dependence or an addiction on it. And so this is a great way students are real easy can make the connection about when we talk about harm reduction, the difference between one drink and 5 drinks, and what it does to the brain. So when we're in a classroom, we'll discuss these a lot more individual and go through some of that. For the sake of time we have today, we're going to just show the stages of intoxication, knowing that this is what we talk about, how it works, but it's a really good harm reduction tool to kind of get students to understand the difference between 1 drink and 5 drink. And it's not that we're promoting if you're drinking 1 drink. It's that we're saying if you are going to use, look at what's happening in the brain and the different areas that it affects, and then the risks that are associated with that, which I believe the next slide, Katie, I have some of these risks. Oh, sorry, we're going to go into overdose. The risks are next. Staying with harm reduction. Us at Prevention Ed, we believe that every student should have this knowledge. Every student that is planning on going to a party while they're in high school, once they graduate and are at university, whether or not it happens to them or their friend, it's really important for them to have that information because it could potentially save someone's life. It could help people limit the amount that they're drinking. Hey, remember last time when you started throwing up and you passed out? Maybe we don't want to get to that point again tonight. So we can monitor our drinking through the night. We can supplement water. We can go home early. We can do those types of things. Primarily, we work with upper school students when we talk about alcohol poisoning, as they're most likely to have that happen to them. We also talk a lot about with grade 12 students who are starting to transition, thinking about transitioning to the next phase of their life, university or back to their home country or whatever that might be, and start thinking about the signs of alcohol overdose. And then we do demonstrate or talk about that recovery position. We also talk a little bit about getting rid of debunking some of the stereotypes of feed them bread or give them water. Alcohol poisons the blood. So if the alcohol is already in the bloodstream, a piece of bread's not going to do anything. You'd be much more beneficial eating a bunch of bread before you decided to drink instead of when you are currently drunk. So we talk a lot about don't feed them. They don't necessarily need water at that time. The best way to get rid of a hangover is time. What they need is time and safety. That's the only way to really reverse the effects of alcohol use is time. Okay, now with these reducing risks, you'll see a lot of them. We're not going to go through all of these. In fact, a lot of these have been given to us by students. We do different activities where we talk about how can we reduce the risk throughout a night. And we get a lot of these, we have these conversations with students where they'll give us some things that they can do. So we're helping them develop basically coping strategies or protective barriers, protective factors for them and their friends when they decide to go out. So again, you'll have this on the PDF. You can print this out. Maybe you can have this conversation in your classroom as well. Go ahead, Katie. All right, so now we're going to transition a little bit into vaping. As you'll see, here are statistics, again, from our survey from 8th, 10th grade. The SPAD, which is the European students' attitudes and perceptions towards substances, really only does 15 and 16-year-olds. So that's why there's only one number for grade 10. That's their demographic. Big jump from 10th grade to 12th grade, as you can see. So 10th grade is a really sweet spot to start really talking about some of these effects, though we do talk about vaping at all ages. Go ahead, Katie. Because it doesn't really matter what age we're talking about. Everybody knows what vaping is. And with the perception of risk of vaping being incredibly, well, lower than that of, say, cigarettes, we see the use then increase. Anytime we're talking about drugs, perception of risk low means use is high. And if you look at cigarettes, it took us it seems like 50 years to get to have the perception of risk be well understood by the general public. And therefore, we've seen teen smoking numbers decrease year after year after year after year until the lowest point that we've ever had right now. But with that, we've seen that an increase in vaping and nicotine pouches because that same perception of risk is not evident when they're making their decisions about vaping. So vaping is not just water vapor. There's no nicotine or light nicotine in the vapes. That's just not true. It's healthier than smoking. And unfortunately, we can't say with definitively yet whether that is true or not. We have a really good idea of what will happen if someone smokes cigarettes for 40 years and the risks associated with that. We currently really don't have anyone on the planet that's vaped for 40 years yet, so we don't have a full understanding of the long-term risks. Spoiler alert, it's probably not going to be good. So we're thinking it's looking like it's going to be as bad or even worse than smoking. Sleek design, flavorings, discreet use, etc. Those all limit the perception of risk and increase the use. Go ahead, Katie. It's one of the all-time favorite slides that we give that students like, and Katie will click through here so that you can see the equivalent of cigarettes compared to that of an e-cig. And this is a trend when we start talking about vaping and cannabis, is the increase in potency of each of those different drugs. The increase in potency means then the increase in risk associated with these substances. I talk a lot about how, if someone were to, I ask the students this, if someone were to start smoking cigarettes tomorrow, how many cigarettes could they smoke in a day without getting caught or in trouble or smell like cigarettes? And the response is usually 1 or 2. And then I ask students, okay, now let's say that person, that 16-year-old doesn't want to smoke cigarettes. Tomorrow they're going to start vaping. How many times can they vape in a day without getting caught? And it's basically infinite. And you know that based on what's going on in your schools and in your bathrooms and even maybe in your home and things like that. So we've seen, even though some countries and some areas have tried to limit the amount of nicotine that is able to be in a vape, what we are seeing is that means even though it matches that or is close to that of a pack of cigarettes, young people are able to use a vape more frequently and more common than cigarettes because of its discreet use and its lack of the smells that that we're used to, and they can do it almost anywhere. And so even though sometimes the milligram dosage might match that of a cigarette, not in all cases, but sometimes the frequency of use is almost certainly higher than that. All right, Katie. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about snus. Now, snus is the name of the type of drug, the product. There's different products that fall under that umbrella. Zyn is the most popular brand in the world right now. The skull that you see on the right was like the old school days, and I think Katie hit it again. We got a picture, right? They used to look like that. It was basically packaged chewing tobacco. Now the nicotine pouches are made with nicotine salts. Which do not look like that. They look as white as that picture is, as you can see the inside of the Zyn. And we're going to talk about Zyn right now when Katie goes to the next slide. Perfect. We use Zyn because it's most popular and people are zinning, and you say Zyn, kids know what that is. You say snus, sometimes their response will be, that's Zyn. And it'll be like, okay, so we're going to call it Zyn. And it's an oral nicotine pouch. They come in tons of different flavors, including menthol, citrus, coffee, you name it, it's out there. Many of them have high nicotine content, milligram dosage, somewhere from 3 to 6 to 9. It's for Zyn, but Velo has their frozen peppermint, which is 17 milligrams per pouch. So we're talking about 1 pouch of this Velo, which is very common in Europe. 1 pouch is 4 milligrams less than a pack of cigarettes. So when I'm talking to students, it took me 20 years to reach a pack and a half of cigarettes at the end of my smoking. So that's about 30 milligrams of nicotine. Now we have students that can take that same amount of nicotine throughout in the school day in 2 pouches or maybe 3 pouches, depending on what product they're using. So they go in usually in the upper lip between the gums and the lip, though they can go on the bottom. People put 2 in at a time, 4 in at a time. They have all kinds of different trendy names for that that you'll see online, like double deckers, things like that. Full house is when you have them on top and bottom. We're just talking about huge milligram contents for young individuals. Go ahead, Katie. So here's that high potency, like I said. You can find a vape distributor online. You Google vape, vapedirect.eu. You can buy anything you want. It'll be sent to you. All you have to do is click, yes, I'm over 18, right? So there's no barrier for a young person to have that ordered and delivered. Chewing tobacco back in the day, for those that might remember, was about 3 milligrams of nicotine per dip, as it was called. Now, the most common Zyn that is sold milligram-wise is the 6 milligram, according to Google and their profit report. So we're talking about double that of the traditional dip of chewing tobacco. So incredibly high potency, which leads to faster addiction and more interference with their health and well-being. So I used to have a lot of students that used to come up to me and talk about how they were worried about a friend or loved one and they're drinking. This was 3-4 years ago. Now the upper school students that come up to me are like, I started vaping or I started using nicotine pouches in grade 9 and now I'm addicted and I can't stop. And we have resources to provide too that can help young people quit through quit plans online. But next slide, Katie. All right, so same technique, new era. Big Tobacco has been doing the same advertising techniques since advertising happened. And these are just the newest version of them. Bright lights, bright colors, celebrity endorsements. That on where it says new era, up that last picture right above it, that is actually a vape that has a digital display on it for different things. We know exactly as adults who they're trying to get to buy that, and it certainly is not someone that's 41 like me. It's someone that's 14 like our students. That's what they're trying to do. Brands, colors, flavors, and basically just use this. You look cool, and that's unfortunately the reason that these ads look the same as they did 80 years ago is because they work. And they continue to work on our most vulnerable people. So this is when we talk about working with students, we start in grade 4, 5, 6, start talking about advertising techniques that take over or attack their vulnerable brains. Not their bad decision making, it's their vulnerability is what they're really going after. And so this is a good way we can start introducing these types of things at a younger age so that they can be aware of these advertising techniques. Go ahead, Katie. All right, last we'll talk just a little bit about cannabis. It is not as commonly used in, like, let's say, Asia and Southeast Asia and Europe as it is in the United States, though the numbers are increasing a little bit in Europe. Again, use the drug, feel the effects. We are doing that same predictable reward. And as always, we're talking about THC levels as they've been increasing. So you'll see the marijuana that if you've ever smoked marijuana or your friends that were doing in high school, our history, if you have used it or your friends have, their history and their relationship with cannabis is nothing like ours is. Back in the hippie days, it was 1% during the counterculture movement and whatnot. Back when I started using marijuana when I was in high school was 3 to 5%. Now we're looking at the THC levels at 23 to 26%, right? Huge spike in the potency. And then we also have other modes of now using that substance, like vape, being able to vape nicotine in different concentrates that have significantly higher amount of cannabis. And I just finished a blog that was posted and was sent out in the newsletter. You can get some more information on that about the 5 M's of cannabis and some of those risk factors with new marijuana, or new cannabis. Our experience with cannabis when we were younger, we can't even relate that to that of the user's experience now, especially in the young adolescent brain. All right. Yeah, so the whole modern drug landscape is different. More students are choosing not to use substances. But those who do are exposed to more risks than ever before. And a lot of that has to do with the potency levels of these new substances. Right. So this is an infographic from our website that Katie made. You know, if alcohol got stronger like we did, where it started out as one shot being 3 to 5% THC to now where it is, right? We're looking at something like 9.5 shots. Okay, so that's kind of the equivalence here. So we have higher levels of THC in cannabis with an increased diagnosis in cannabis use disorder. Extreme high levels of nicotine. We got students already struggling to quit. What they thought was just going to be a phase is turned into, if there's any ex-smokers or current smokers in here, a lifelong battle with that terrible drug. And finally, we're going to touch on fentanyl right now because to talk a little bit about it, the most common way for young people to come in contact with fentanyl is through counterfeit pills. And I know it's not a worldwide epidemic like it has been in the United States, but our students travel a lot. And summer's coming up. Maybe they're taking a vacation there. Maybe they're going to go look at some college and universities. Maybe that's where they live. Even in Canada as well, we see this. So for our students that might be traveling back to that area, we need to start talking about the prescription medicine or the counterfeit pills that they might be using. That is the number one way that our students are going to come in contact with fentanyl. It is not going to be from intravenous drug use like heroin and methamphetamine. That's not how our students are going to do it. That's not what the data says. It's going to be from going to a party and taking a pill that they thought was a Xanax and was laced with fentanyl. Unfortunately, that's the reality that they have. Thankfully, we don't have to worry about that a lot right now in the international world, but it is important for our upper school students to know that when they're transitioning away from their school back to their home country for university or whatever, and those that might be traveling to the United States for recreational purposes. So, all right, well, thank you again. Delay use is our number one message to those that it applies to, but we start talking a little bit about harm reduction. And just a reminder, harm reduction is not giving permission to use. It's trying to get those individuals that are going to choose to use to give them the resources they need to be as safe as possible, in hopes that they start making healthier decisions about their use as time goes on. But nobody deserves to get hurt or get in trouble or have something happen to them if they decide to use. We want to try to keep everyone safe. And students tend to take care of themselves when they go out to the parties together. So, all right, Katie, thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. That was amazing. I didn't mean to switch so quickly over to the next topic, which is porn, while you were still talking, but here we are. I just want to echo what Kevin said. Harm reduction, a conversation about harm reduction benefits every student in the room, regardless of their choice to use alcohol or their drugs, right? And it might benefit hopefully it benefits the students who do make that choice because they're kids. That's developmentally appropriate, right? It's not everyone, but it's a percentage of them, because their friend got the information to help keep them safe. And so it can be life-saving. That is where we come from when we're having this conversation with substances, and we're very clear on that. So pornography. Okay, so really we've invested a lot in gambling. Obviously, alcohol and other drugs, I keep saying, are our bread and butter, but we have been getting questions about porn. We get a lot of questions about social media, and so I'm going to touch on them very quickly. But similarly, right, we have that through line, which is that anticipation versus reward, that variable reward experience. And with pornography, what it looks like is not so much watching the content itself. When pornography and the use of pornography becomes problematic, is that anticipation, searching for content that is going to do it for that individual, whatever that looks like. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. So something that should be on your radar as a counselor, as an administrator, as a designated safeguarding lead is that age of first exposure. Now it's saying 13 to 17. I'm hearing 9 from some of other consultants that work in the international school world that are about digital wellness and tech and that touch on this topic. So where is it happening? That's something that we should be on our radar. Our students being exposed to this on campus, something that is, definitely our responsibility then to address and reduce that risk of happening. That anticipation spike, like I said, it's the searching, the scrolling, the novelty seeking, not actually the pornography itself. At first, right, it definitely is. It's curiosity. It is, I this is what I'm told I'm supposed to be into. That's, when it comes to sexuality, curiosity is natural. And so it can be very innocent at first, right? But eventually what happens is something like that individual builds a tolerance. And this is known, actually, it's got a name. It's called the Coolidge effect, right? And so the Coolidge effect, not this Coolidge, right? Not this Coolidge, is actually named after this Coolidge, who was a vice president who then became president of the United States. There's a whole joke that goes along with this story, which I'm not really a fan of, but this is where the name comes from, is this idea that individuals, when it comes to dopamine, they build a tolerance to the thing that they're exposed to over and over and over again, right? And so the Coolidge effect seeks novelty to get that dopamine hit, right? And so your kids, if we're talking about pictures, right, they might know who Jennifer Coolidge is, right, from White Lotus, right? They might not know who Calvin Coolidge was, to this, old president of the United States, but they definitely know this meme. This is how you could explain it to them, right? Novelty. Novelty is what releases that dopamine, and when we apply it to the use of pornography, here's what we typically see: a tolerance for using to consuming pornography more frequently, consuming content that is more explicit and more explicit and more explicit. As you can imagine, and there's been some recent news stories that talk about this, right? This takes people to and can take people to very, very dark areas of the internet where people are being exploited, and that the content is just very dangerous and violent and scary. And so that's what we see, right? And again, it's not that the pornography video itself, it's the searching and scrolling for that content. And part of the reason why we see the tolerance and part of the reason why we see the seeking of more explicit content is this phenomenon known as the Coolidge effect, which says, I want more, I want something more exciting, I want something more novel. And like I said, you can see where that can get scary pretty quickly. Social media. Last year it was Jonathan Haidt's The Anxious Generation, which, I'm sure many of you on this call have read, that has really helped us start to get together as communities, as schools and parents, right? To start saying, what are we doing about this, right? And when we look at that through line of anticipation versus reward, this is how it's impacting the teenage brain. So it's about, and when I say this to kids, it hits, they get it, right? They're doing their homework, they're sitting at their desk, they pick up their phone to take a 5-minute break. An hour later, they've just been doom scrolling and they don't even know what happened. They just got sucked in. But they wasted an hour of their study time, but they had 2 minutes where they found a really hilarious TikTok that hit really hard that they sent to the group chat. That's what they're searching for, that anticipation of finding that funny video, right, that you can share with your friends. When they're posting on social media, it's that anticipation of getting likes, of being validated, of feeling like you belong, right? Not the post itself, right? So it's that anticipation and then reward, right? The anticipation is the thing that keeps them coming back, even though they feel crummy after doom scrolling and staying up to 2 o'clock in the morning, right? So that's what that looks like in terms of the variable reward. For the social media aspect, this is again from Jonathan Haidt's The Anxious Generation's website, his data. You can see 2012, right? 2009, really 2008 to 2015. 2012 was the year that Instagram came out. We see skyrocketing rates of, daily social media use nearly every day. And with that, we saw skyrocketing rates, especially among our young female students, of anxiety and depression and body dysmorphia, which is a whole other thing that we could talk about. We could do pornography and peptides if we wanted to add peptides, which are research chemicals that we're seeing now. Some young people start to buy and purchase for increasing their muscle mass, changing their body composition, but that's a whole other conversation. So Negative consequence is not just with the use, right? Not just the time suck that social media. We're seeing increased anxiety, we're seeing increased depression, we're seeing disordered eating and increase of body dysmorphia. We see that as restricting in-person relationships, and we're seeing these parasocial or just purely online relationships, which can serve a purpose, but in terms of socialization and that developmental aspect of being an adolescent is crucial, right? Um, and then exposure to harmful content, right? So this is kind of where they all compound, right? Evan mentioned a website where you can get vapes and nicotine and those counterfeit pills people are getting on in the US. They're buying them online, right? The exposure to pornography, the gambling, the sports betting. Uh, as adults, we need to stop separating IRL versus online life. For them, this generation, it is all the same thing and it compounds risk. And that's where we need to step up and make sure that we're informed to understand all of the risks that these landscapes present to our young people. So coming back to Dopamine Nation and Anna Lembke, Dr. Anna Lembke, right? This is where a lot of these researchers are saying, this increase of anxiety, this increase of depression, this decrease in life satisfaction, it's coming from a place of an abundance of pleasure, right? And we have a hedonic set point in our brains, right? And what that means is our brains want to keep us leveled out. We have good days, we have bad days. We have that line, that baseline of being healthy and sometimes dipping below the line and sometimes having a really good day and going above the line. And dopamine, it can send us whoop up here, right? And when we have that constant access to pleasure at our fingertips with all of these behaviors, right? We get these constant spikes. Our brain wants to even us out. And this overexposure to all of this is starting to make us dip below the line. And that's where we're seeing burnout. That's where we're seeing depression. That's where we're seeing anxiety. Now, I don't have the peer-reviewed paper right now to say this is, and this is exactly what those numbers look like. And this is, we can connect this to this. But this is where a lot of these researchers are agreeing is why we're seeing the mental health issues that we're seeing with this generation. So we got a couple minutes left. I want to be respectful of everyone's time. Again, you're going to get this slide, so you'll see all this information. This is kind of just the variation of variable reward to predictable reward and what that looks like with the developing brain. But what do we do now, right? So first off, how do we help our students? So when we talk about why they don't ask for help, with substances, we can certainly point to stigma. We can certainly point to fear of consequences. And like I mentioned earlier with gambling, they might not see it as an issue. Stigma when it comes to pornography and when it comes to losing lots and lots of money or your inheritance, you can imagine how that can be very shaming and prevent many students from asking for help, right? But here's the thing. What we need to realize as the adults in the communities is that the behavior is often the solution, right? They didn't pick up gambling or alcohol or other drugs or pornography because they just thought it would be fun to struggle with that behavior, right? There's something that it is doing for them. And that's what we have to start thinking from the perspective of how is this helping our students, right? So these things are not the problem. Oftentimes there are young people's solutions, right? And so behind every one of these behaviors is a young person that is craving relief or escape or connection, even if it's just for a brief moment, right? And when we can see that, right, we can start connecting with them and addressing the issue on their level, right? Instead of saying this is bad for you, don't do this, right? This has been made readily available to them. They're being targeted, right? They feel like, when it comes to alcohol or the drugs, it's going to help them belong, right? Those are the things that we need to address from a preventative standpoint and an early intervention standpoint to make sure our students are healthy. Now, we don't have time to go over this, right? But essentially, this is what I'm getting at, right? This is an example of a case example of a student named Jaden who started gambling, and he now is in debt of $500 with two of his classmates. His teacher sees that he's disengaged. He's getting up to go bet in the middle of class, and now he's started to eat lunch alone, right? And so through three different lenses for Jaden's cases, right? This is where this applies, and these behaviors apply for counselors, administrators, designated safeguarding leaves, right? And again, because I'm just trying to be mindful of time and respectful of everyone's schedule, right? I'm going through this pretty quickly, but these are the questions we should be asking ourselves, right? If a student is betting, right? Why is he betting? Is it because he wants to belong with the other men in his peer group that are also doing this? If he owes students other money from a safeguarding point, um, there that is now no longer a just a gambling issue. That is a potential student exploitation issue. That he is he being requested to work off the debt? Is he concerned about his physical safety? And then an administrator issue for this case example specifically, right? Are students operating as bookies at the school? Did this happen during school hours, on school Wi-Fi, on a school issued device, right? And then where are the policy and curriculum gaps that need to address this? So this goes just beyond where what we are talking about at the International School Counselor Association conference at ISCA. This is something that needs to be addressed beyond the one-on-one individual level. This needs to be addressed at the policy level as well, right? And so again, I'm not going to go through all of this. This is a lot of font on the screen, and this is really for you all to review if you feel like this is some action you want to take on your school campus. But we do have Prevention Ed's gambling policy template, right, that you can just click here, that has been updated to also mention investment clubs. We have a ton of resources that counselors can use to make referrals or just to have these conversations, right, in advisory or to incorporate into your social emotional learning. We have, Kevin mentioned his recent blog, which is about cannabis that we sent out for 420. We have the Prevention Ed blog, which we talk about gaps here. This is hyperlinked. I mentioned earlier the Investment Clubs blog. This went out earlier this week. It'll be hyperlinked here. You can also go to our website to learn more about this. And then resources. We have done webinars with ISCA for counselors specifically. Motivational interviewing as an addictions counselor is the most evidence-based intervention. And there's brief motivational interviewing, which we talk about, which will be more appropriate for school counselors to identify and intervene and hopefully start to make some changes for your students who may be struggling with some of these behaviors. And then a more recent update on gambling in teens that we can also share. You can also take a look at. So I want to thank you all so much. We're 2 minutes over for being here. If you found this helpful, we will be sending this recording of the webinar out to everybody who attended. If you want to learn more about Prevention Ed and what we can offer your community, please feel free to scan the QR code and reach out to us. We're happy to send you more resources, answer any questions that you have about what a program could look like. This is something that, our team, I feel very lucky. I have an amazing team: Kevin, Luna Gayaski, Hope Wild, Stacey Wizineski. Many of you have worked with them. They are incredibly passionate about this work. They have amazing stories and they're really good at what they do. We love what we do, and we would love to share more about how we can support your community in having these conversations, whether it's a webinar for parents or whether it's us coming to your school in person to support you, or counselor trainings, whatever. We offer a lot of different services around these topics. So again, thank you all so much. I hope you all have a wonderful weekend, and thank you for taking the time to learn more and show up for your students today.
Thank you. Take care.